If you're going to have a conversation with just someone about something and you need to convince them of something, well, you need to first understand how they see that topic to begin with so that you can start changing their viewpoint, or perhaps just align with it perfectly. It doesn't matter what company size they're working in, even if you're talking about some business concept. What matters is, well, what do they hope for? What do they expect? What do they believe? What do they fear? What sort of problems they've had before? What sort of experience they have, and so on and so on.
Hello and welcome to Marketing Speak. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer. It is my pleasure to have Peter Sandeen with us. Peter is often called the marketer's marketer because more than half of his clients are other marketing experts. They come to him for clarity to what makes them stand out from the competition and what impacts their results the most. Peter's approach is based on a decade of conversion optimization, looking at what improves your marketing results most consistently. Peter, it's so great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So we know each other through JVMM, Joint Venture Mastermind. I've been a member probably for at least 6 years, I think. And I think you've been a member for quite a while as well, right?
So I think 9-10 years, something like that.
Yeah, amazing. Dove is such a great guy. And what got you to join the community?
I think it was pretty simple. Danny recommended me into the group, and I was like, hell yeah. Yes, please. So it was a pretty no-brainer, partially because I didn't really have a lot of people to talk about marketing with. The marketing culture here in Finland is, let's say, old-fashioned. I've had to fight with like forward-thinking software startups about how marketing and sales should at least sometimes talk to each other. Whereas they often think of it as two completely separate functions. So just having more like-minded people was a relief. And I mean, obviously lots of interesting people to meet and collaborate with and work with. So it's been an easy decision to stick around.
Yeah, awesome. So what happens when sales and marketing operate as silos and don't collaborate?
Nothing good. Yeah, nothing good. I think the most obvious one is that the goals don't really align. Marketing ends up aiming for as many as possible just leads, and the quality may technically be there. Like they may technically match some criteria of like, well, they're this sort of people, but they are not really primed for buying something. They're not really the ones within that group of people who would be most perceptive to buying from this particular company. So instead of looking at it as, well, what kind of a person is most likely to buy? What do we need to tell them for them to want to buy from us? It becomes a question of, well, how do we get as many people as technically qualify as the right people? And then it's those salespeople who it's their problem if they don't make sales. And it's like, I mean, obviously I'm exaggerating ever so slightly, but not nearly as much as I would like that to be an exaggeration. So yes, obviously you can have a separate marketing team and a separate sales team, but the goal is the same, make sales. And whenever there's that separation, I've never seen much of a benefit to it. Whereas, the day-to-day can be separate, that's fine. But strategy, thinking of, well, what is actually impacting results should be mutual.
Yeah. So for example, if the marketing department doesn't truly understand the buyer objections of the audience that they're sending as supposedly qualified leads, then they're not preempting those objections through marketing collateral and communications such as email drip campaigns and so forth prior to the sales conversation with the salesperson.
That's one of the simple examples. The other that comes up a ton is just the market selection or target audience selection within the market. So salespeople will easily say that, well, our target audience is CTOs of companies with at least 100 million in revenue or whatever. From a marketing perspective, it would be much more helpful to know that, well, within that group, we're interested in people who have experience with other companies like ours, but are unhappy about their pricing structure or whatever, because our pricing structure is very different and more beneficial. There often is just this mismatch of understanding the detail of information that would be helpful. Objections are just the same. The best way to get rid of objections in sales is to deal with it in marketing.
Mhm.
It's just more effective to deal with an objection before anyone thinks about the objection. So
Yeah, makes total sense. So, what are the most common objections that you come across with your clients and in your own marketing too?
well, varies obviously a lot, but I think the one that people often don't think of as an objection that is an objection is trust or lack of trust, especially if you sell something that comes with a high risk. And the high risk can be like switch to a different software. Well, the risk is not necessarily that the new software is full of malware. The risk is that how much time does it take to implement it? How much time does it take to integrate it? How much time does it take for people to learn to use it? And what if there's a tiny mistake? How big can that one mistake become in the grand scheme of things? So if there's one comma mistake, if there's one calculation error within the software, if it's like I have a client that manufactures like has a software for multi-physics simulations. If there's a mix up in those simulations, that can be worth hundreds of millions, if not more, if it's not caught. Whereas,
That can end careers too, right?
yeah, exactly. So the risk is massive. And in B2B, I think one of the biggest risks is specifically your own reputation. So if you're the person in charge of buying, but it's not your company, then if you make a mistake, unfortunately, often that means you get fired or you don't get the promotion or you're sort of shunned away from future decisions, or like trust is a much bigger issue than I think many people sort of consciously think about it. They see it as, well, trust just happens as we talk for 17 hours with these people and like they'll trust us. But you don't need to talk with 17 hours with them. You can talk with them once if you've already done a ton of trust building with the marketing and the messaging and the positioning and everything. So I think that's one of the most obvious ones.
Switching costs are, in other words, are not about the cost of like hard costs of going from one platform to another. If you need to, let's say, hire a outside consulting team to implement that switch over, it's not about just the cost savings from one platform to another, et cetera. It's about the risk and de-risking and bringing attention to those risks because they're already in the person's mind, and just helping to alleviate or calm those concerns.
Yeah. And I mean, that's also the one that I come across the most. I sell services that help with the most fundamental parts of your marketing, your like what your business is built around. There's a lot of risk involved. If I give bad advice, that can be expensive. Hence, most of my clients are referrals, which is why most of my clients are marketing companies, because marketing companies hire me and then they talk to other marketing companies and they like word spreads. It's like I don't intentionally do marketing for marketing people. They like it's just referrals.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think this is something that people often underestimate how significantly or how significant the risk appears for the other side, often subconsciously, because it isn't just the hard cost, it's the opportunity cost, it's the time, it's the reputational damage, it's all the other things that can go wrong.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think objections can be split into different groups, multiple different ways. There's all sorts of clever acronyms of like, oh, there's time and reputation and money and so on. You can think of it that way, but I think the more useful way to look at it is, yeah, start with the big picture, like, well, trust, risk, money, time, and so on. But then look at much, much, much more specific objections, much more specific than what people even articulate themselves. So if they say that, well, let's say it's accounting software. Maybe they're worried about, well, we're not sure about how much time it's going to take to implement. Well, that's still a very broad objection. Maybe the objection more specifically is we're not sure how long our tech team is going to require to understand how it's going to integrate with our other systems. Well, you can get rid of much of that objection with a much more specific answer. So you can just point out that, well, our tech team is going to deal with your tech team's trouble of dealing with the integration. Now there's no objection of our tech team needs to take a lot of like time to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So getting much, much more specific of what is really underneath the objections is I don't know. You didn't really ask, but anyway, that's how I often approach it. Like try to get much more specific so you can then change the offer, change the messaging, change the positioning, change something so that it doesn't even come up as an objection.
Yeah. There are these little techniques or hacks in conversion optimization and in just overall marketing, like risk reversal, which it's a hack and it doesn't really get at the core issue. And it's like, well, you'll get 100% of your money back, or even better, we'll give you 200% of your money back, or whatever. But it doesn't address the elephant in the room. There is that I would feel embarrassed to ask for money back. I never do that. Like, I don't send meals back if they're not tasty at the restaurant. I just feel really uncomfortable doing that. So that's not truly a risk reversal. It's just it's a gimmick.
It
So
can work to
yeah,
some degree, but the more carefully, like the more considerate your prospect is, the less effective those sorts of gimmicks usually are. The more it becomes about, can you truly take away much of the true underlying risk that they're thinking of, or the true underlying worry they have. So whether it is reputational or about their tech team's time management, like whatever it is, the more precisely you can address it, the better.
let's walk through your framework or system for overhauling somebody's messaging or their way of communicating the value of their products or services.
So the first thing I do is look at, or let's say, evaluate their target audience, how they are defining it. So sometimes we do redefine it, but it's more about getting very specific about the way in which they're defining it. So, for example, if you're in B2B, the industry you're targeting is more or less irrelevant for your messaging. The company size you're targeting is usually also more or less irrelevant. Like, yeah, they are sometimes important, but usually they don't make much of a difference. Similarly, the decision maker's job title, probably irrelevant. What, like, you can rather think of it in terms of, well, if you're going to have a conversation with just someone about something and you need to convince them of something, well, you need to first understand how they see that topic to begin with so that you can start changing their viewpoint, or perhaps just align with it perfectly. It doesn't matter what company size they're working in, even if you're talking about some business concept. What matters is, well, what do they hope for? What do they expect? What do they believe? What do they fear? What sort of problems they've had before? What sort of experience they have, and so on and so on.
Yeah, so you're understanding their worldview, and understanding their job title doesn't really help you to understand their worldview.
Yeah, exactly. To some degree, yes, someone's job title can help us get a little better understanding of their worldview, depending, like in the context of a topic. But that's very rarely a very defining feature. So that's where I start, because a lot of companies have never truly gone through this part of the exercise. They've done all the demographics, like company size, location, industry, so on. And some of the psychographics, like, well, what are their biggest problems? But it's really just scratching the surface. So, first step, I need to understand, like, I need to be able to take on the target customer's perspective, because that's what everything I do is based on. I'm able to look at what you do from your target customer's perspective. So I can tell, well, what would I need to be told so that I would get the right impression? The second thing I usually do, we can sometimes skip this, but I like to look at the offer as well, because it's essentially the question of, well, what are you asking me to do? You're asking me to buy something in the end. So, but what is it truly you're asking me to do? How much time is it going to take? What is it going to be like? Does it address all my objections, my worries, my fears, my hopes and dreams, or not? It's exponentially harder to sell something that has even like one slight thing off, because that's what I'm going to fixate on as the potential customer. I'm going to fixate on that one little thing that doesn't really matter, but it isn't quite what I wish it to be. If you can get rid of all of those, there's very little negative for me to fixate on, and it becomes sort of an obvious option. Yes, you can obviously sell something people don't really want, and it's even easier to sell something that people like just have a slight, like some annoyance with. But that's still a massive disadvantage compared to something that is exactly what people want. So it makes the messaging part infinitely easier and more effective if you actually think through the offering again, from the target customer's perspective, not from the perspective of, and this is sort of starting to veer to the messaging side, not from the perspective of what they would write down as their requirements or what are the things that they value the most, but rather what are the things that motivate them? What are the things that truly drive the decision? Because, well, let's use your example. I use the same one all the time. People are worried about embarrassment. People are often worried about how that decision is going to reflect on them, even if it doesn't really affect the business. A common one is that someone might be worried about how much time from them individually something is going to take. Even if from the company's perspective, it's irrelevant if you, middle manager, are going to spend 100 hours or just 7 hours on this thing. Like, in the grand scheme of this $100 million project, like, who cares? But you do, and you're the one who's going to either push us forward to the sale or going to make our life very hard as the salespeople. So thinking through, well, how can we make the offer, like what are the parts of the offer that really are the motivating things, and also what wouldn't motivate, so that we can steer clear of those. But that's sort of the like first big part of thinking of the message itself. What is it that motivates people to buy this sort of a thing? Not just our specific thing, but what is motivating in this whole grand topic. So if we sell accounting, it's not just accounting software. It's how do they deal? What motivates them to create reporting better, or things related to just security and finances, or their own jobs prospects of getting a raise or bonuses, or how easy it is to manage the team, and so on and so on. I don't have any accounting software companies now as clients, so I'm kind of rusty on the examples there, but that's the next part, like really separating out what is valuable and what is motivating, because there's overlap, a lot of it, but what really counts are the things that are motivating, not really so much the valuable parts. Yeah. It's the old idea of like people make the decision emotionally and then they justify it to themselves logically. So yeah, we need to tell them the valuable bits in marketing, but we don't lead with those because we don't really capture someone's like true interest with something that's just valuable.
That relates to the old adage, you sell them what they want and you give them what they need.
Yeah, it is similar to that as well.
Okay, so that's step 2, is looking at the offer from the target customer's perspective. How about step 3?
Yeah, so the next step is looking at what do they compare you to? Before they even know you exist, what are the comparisons? And it's not just direct competitors. Some direct competitors might very well be worth looking at, because if your target customers likely compare you to specific direct competitors, then yeah, by default, they do compare you to those. But there's often also indirect competitors, and then there's something that's hard to even call describe as a competitor. It's like if you sell therapy services, going out to a bar with your friends is an alternative. Not maybe a good one. Maybe it's a good one for someone, but like it might not be a very good solution to talking about your worries, but it is an alternative way to get some camaraderie, or get to talk out your issues, or get some reassurance that you're okay, or something like that. So typical competitor analysis is just wholly insufficient and often misleads people into just very poor decisions about what differentiates them or what they think differentiates them. So you need to look at, well, what are really all the options that you're compared to? And then you can start looking at what do you do differently in a way that is meaningful, understandable, easy to understand for people, believable, and so on and so on. So like really like look at what differentiates you in a way that when people see it, ideally, they would then be disappointed with all the other options they have, because they wouldn't get that one thing that differentiates you, or those 3 things that differentiate you.
Can you give an example, perhaps from a client that you worked with?
They are often a little secretive about this part because it makes it easier to challenge them. But the basic idea is looking at, well, if you're a therapist, then, well, what separates you from other therapists and talking with friends and getting drunk? Well, maybe one thing that separates you is that what you offer is quick. It actually creates a significant difference in one session, let's say. That would be the kind of differentiator that makes a difference to all the alternatives, not just the direct competitors. It's also easy to explain. It's easy to understand. It might not be easy to believe, so I'm not sure if that would work, but if it is easy to believe, then great. So it's that's the sort of thing you have to look at. And I think the best way to start is to look at what are the negative things people associate, like your target customer specifically, what they associate as negative aspects to all the main competitors and main alternatives. If you do something opposite to those negatives, brilliant. That's one of the best ways to find the differentiators that will really make a difference.
Okay, so as a marketing expert, give me an example of how other marketing experts do things a particular way and you do them differently.
Well, if you compare me to certain massive consulting companies that many big brands hire, if you hire me, I come in and try to give you a actionable implementation of a solution within a month or two. If it's just the messaging, we can even do it in 2 weeks. If you hire one of those big, I don't want to name names, but
Right.
think of a consulting company, and you're probably thinking of the one that I now refer to. They're going to come in with like a motivational speaker basically shows up to the office and says that now we're going to overhaul everything, and then bring in like a busload of 20 somethings with fresh MBAs who are going to camp in your meeting areas for a month or two. And then they present you with some sort of a PowerPoint about company structure and efficiency and such. And then you need to ask, so how does this help us with messaging? And it's like, well, no, this is the framework for on which we then build the messaging project. It's like, so like 6 months later, you have something resembling messaging. So something that separates me is that, well, we can be done in 2 weeks. You can have ready messaging. We can implement it in another 2 weeks across the entire company if you want. So it's like speed and just like focusing on the task at hand is something that separates me from most of the alternatives people compare me to, especially in the bigger company space.
Yeah, I like it. I like it.
I don't usually say it quite that directly, but you asked, so I hope people can hear the like slight exaggeration. Although, if you've ever hired said or unsaid company, you know that I'm not exaggerating much.
Yeah, no, that was a great off the cuff answer. I like it. Okay, so what's step 4 after you've figured out what the target customer is comparing you to?
So that's the final step. It's creating what I call the standout message. The idea is to write down very clearly what are the things we want to communicate with marketing. What is it that we want people to understand first? And I think it's easier to reflect this on like what are the common alternatives. So USPs, unique selling proposition, good idea. Problem is it's usually not very practical. Same with value proposition. Anything but practical. Those usually come out at some company meeting like 2 times a year, and that's about it. Because they answer such sort of general, like, well, what is the thing that differentiates us, or what is the value we provide? The standout message, the idea of it is that you can just give this one piece of paper to anyone who does marketing or any decisions related to marketing or sales, and it's like, focus on these things. And then you have like pretty free reign on everything else. So you can write a million social media posts. Just make sure that at least 999,000 of them focus on these specific ideas, because these are the things we want people to associate to us. These, as long as you stick to this blueprint, it's going to create a very cohesive image of what we are about and why. Like it's forcing all the marketing material to focus on the things that will get people's attention, will associate the right things to us, will make them notice the differences that we want them to notice. So yeah, that's the final step. Putting it into a form that is easy to use in practice. So it's supposed to be something, I mean, a lot of clients say that they just print it out and like staple it to the wall next to their computer screen because it's something you use all the time. Because it doesn't only affect marketing decisions. It also is like, well, product development. Well, now you know what are the things, what are the advantages you have. So in product development, make damn sure you're not going to let go of those things. It also highlights all the things that don't really make you stand out. So even if you do put a lot of resources on those, it's very unlikely to make a big difference to your sales. Or customer service. Well, is customer service listed as one of the reasons people hire you? If yes, how? What part of customer service is the thing that really we want people to believe in and experience? put the resources on those. Not necessarily on the fastest response, not necessarily the friendliest person, not necessarily the most experienced, like whatever specific thing is the thing that really makes you stand out, make sure that that's what you deliver. So it ends up being like, I usually do this with the CEO and CMO or marketing team, like the highest like C-suite, the people who are most responsible for those sorts of decisions, because it guides a lot of it, because it essentially tells, this is why people buy from us. That's what it tells. So let's make people believe these things. They'll probably buy from us.
Gotcha. And this is quite different from a tagline. So, for example, Cisco invested a lot of money in coming up with this tagline, the human network. And I don't know if they still use it or not, but they used it for a while, and they invested a lot of advertising dollars in putting that message out there. But it wasn't really a standout message from what you described, because it didn't convey something that would be practical or useful for me as the customer. Like, I wouldn't say like, wow, because they're the human network, this is a no-brainer, I need to hire them.
Yeah, it didn't tell you as the potential customer anything that would motivate you to buy. It didn't tell anything that would differentiate them in a good way or meaningful way. You can argue that, well, a tagline, it's only supposed to create this feeling or something. And like, sure, but you can do more than that. It's like, I'm not saying it was necessarily a terrible tagline, but it certainly was missing most of the potential of the tagline. I mean, just do it is, I think, the sort of the best tagline in history, because it's clever, it's memorable, it's fun, assuming you don't know the history of it. It came from it was the last words of someone before they were executed. That's where it literally came from. But it conveys a very specific feeling that Nike specifically wants to associate with sports related top like products. But you don't need to be clever like that. It's much better that you get something out. If we're going to tagline, well, this applies to all marketing. It's better to be clear and meaningful than clever. If you want to be really artistic, then try poetry, maybe painting, but like keep it separate. Like always err on the side of clear over clever. Once you're clear, then you can improve it, but with something clever. But if you start like sort of discounting the value of clarity, then you're almost always doing it a bit poorly.
Yeah. How did you find out that the history of the "Just Do It" tagline?
I'm actually not sure where I read it. So to be clear, I'm not guaranteeing that's true. It may be a false story, but I'm pretty careful with how I categorize info in my head. So if I remember it as a believable thing, I think it was fairly believable when I heard it. So
Wow, that's wild. Okay, so give us an example of a standout message. It could be yours, it could be a client's, it could be a competitor's, but something that is really exemplary, and not just a like Nike's tagline, but something that feels doable for us to implement.
all right, so it's a bit hard to give a full example because it's not just like 3 words. The way that I write it is that it's 3 separate points, or 3 separate ideas, 3 separate thoughts, basically the 3 main reasons for people to buy. Or what are the, not necessarily the main reasons to buy, but what are the most impactful things they could hear first. And usually it's 2 or 3 sentences per point or per thought, just to make it clear for us what is it that we want to really get across. So if I simplify my own, I probably shouldn't, but let's say I open this up a little. Like, one point is that I work mostly with marketing professionals or marketing companies, because marketing companies don't hire people who don't know how to really drill down to something very well. And if marketing companies need help with their own messaging, that also means that, well, no matter what you do and how good you are at marketing, you still have some blind spots. If even marketing companies, like big, very, very good marketing companies, recognize they need outside help with this, it's a pretty good reason to consider getting that help. And if those really good companies, people who do this sort of thing for others, if they hire me, I must sort of know what I'm talking about. So that's one of the things that I like to bring up. And really, I probably shouldn't say this because it's kind of like I showed you a magic trick and now I'm explaining it and it kind of ruins the magic. But
No, it's awesome because what you've explained here isn't just that uh, marketers who are going to potentially hire you recognize that they have blind spots and that you're able to show those blind spots to them and help them shore up their offer, their messaging, their positioning, all that. But you're also deselecting those prospects who don't admit they have blind spots and are therefore full of hubris and arrogance. And who wants them as clients, anyways?
yeah. Another thing that I like to bring up, especially if I talk more about like marketing decision making, which I help a lot most clients with as well, like on an ongoing advisory basis, is that I point out that like my goal is not to put more on your plate. My goal is to take most of what's on your plate and take it away, because most likely 90% of what you're doing is not essential. I often talk about marketing essentialism, this idea of like very, very few things are truly essential and everything else is like, well, it's good if you get to it, but you really need to get those essential things right. And most of the potential results are in how well you do those essentials. So if we would talk about, like we before we started, I mentioned that like that's a harder thing to have a conversation about, like how to make good marketing decisions, or it ends up being like a 3 hour conversation every time. But like if we would have gone there, I would have highlighted all the time about like the goal is to make the next action as clear as possible with no distractions. That's how you get things done. And when you get things done, you can see the results of them. There's, for example, I might bring up the example of if you spend 6 months on a project, or if you have a problem, let's say whatever problem you have, some challenge in marketing, and it's a really significant thing. You might have the inclination of carefully strategizing, carefully planning exactly the best possible solution to it. Natural idea, minimizing risk because it's a high risk thing. That might be a mistake in itself, because those 6 or 9 months that it's going to take for you to create that plan and implement that plan carefully, slowly, meticulously, you're all the time still experiencing the problem. An alternative would have been to have an hour-long conversation with me, have a decision made by the end of the day, implement it in 2 weeks, and then see how is it working, and implement it in a way that is not like what's the word? It doesn't fully commit you to it forever. It's something that is specifically easy to adjust, easy to optimize. Because the more significant the decision is, the more people have this subconscious thought that the decision they make is somehow more and more permanent, the more significant the decision is. Whereas it should almost go the other way around. If it's super significant, you should specifically make a decision that you can improve on, because if and when you inevitably, as a human, don't make the best possible decision every single time, the consistent way of getting good results is to make decisions and implement things in a way that allows you to quickly improve on it. Quickly get the data of, is this the right direction? If no, then make a change. If you spend 9 months, you have maybe marginally lower chance of making it a poor decision initially. So maybe you have a 95% chance of making a good decision instead of 93% chance of making a good decision, but you're losing 6 months or a year. So anyway, like,
Yeah, I love this expression. I don't remember where I heard it from, but perfect is the enemy of done.
yes, I use multiple versions of that because I love the saying, but yes.
Well, we don't have to talk for 3 hours, but I think this is an important topic. And by the way, I think there's a book in you on this. I think you should, if there isn't already, a book called Marketing Essentialism that needs to come from you.
I've had that planned for a few years. I just haven't written it.
Yeah, well, maybe do some decision making and just get on with it.
Well, I have, and I've always decided it's not the highest priority.
Okay, gotcha. Well, good. And so the fallacy, and again, to reiterate what you're saying, is that people think the more significant the decision, that then it's harder to extricate yourself out of that decision, when you could actually make it the opposite. you could make more significant decisions actually easier to extricate yourself out of.
Yeah, and I think, well, I think there's a bigger conversation to be had of like how people make it so that it's hard for them to admit mistakes. So if you form a strong opinion about something, it is generally harder for you to later on admit to yourself or to others that you were wrong. Whereas if you approach things with, okay, so what is just like, given what we know now, what's the best thing we can do right now? And then just do that. And then look at tomorrow again. Okay, given what we now know, what's the best way to go? I mean, I'm exaggerating maybe with the timeline, but if it is the option of like, let's hire a consulting company to do research for 9 months and then plan a strategy for the next 3 months, and then we implement it for another 2 years, then okay, so 3 years go by while we're trying to solve this problem. If the alternative is that, okay, in a month we have attempted a perfectly valid, good solution, and then we can evaluate, did it work? Did it not? Did it improve? Can we go into the same direction? Do we modify something? If we do the modification and optimization for, I don't know, let's say 3 more months, we've spent 4 months and we probably have a better solution than what we would have had with 3 months of just planning. Because I don't remember where it came from, some famous quote about warfare that like no plan survives the contact with the enemy. It's the same in marketing. Like you can have the best plan and you still shouldn't ever expect it to really work as you have planned. Every good plan, in my opinion, is one that has built in checks for, is this working, and built in ways of course correcting when something isn't working as planned. It also, I think, like when I plan marketing strategies or campaigns, I look at how can we build in ways for us to get feedback about why this isn't working, if and when something isn't working, so that in the middle of the campaign, we're not going to be blind to, well, we're not getting leads. That could be a million things. But if the campaign itself is structured in a way that gives us the feedback of, well, the most likely reason we're not getting leads is this, then we can quickly pivot. I mean, I don't like the word pivot because it's used so ridiculously, but you get the idea of like quickly getting something done and counting on the optimization. Obviously, yes, do the initial thing well. Don't hire, a random kiddo from school to like plan your marketing suddenly, like because he can do it in an hour. Like, no, obviously, like, yeah, do it carefully enough. But people discount the value of just solving a thing quickly, looking at, well, did it work? If not, then solve it again. Did it work? Great. Now let's move on to the next thing. It's way more consistently effective, but it also requires you to be able to look at things as like be willing to endure the uncertainty that you experience by making a decision in an hour rather than outsourcing the decision to an expensive consultancy that is going to present you with a PDF 9 months later or 3 months later. Like that feels safe, but that's almost guaranteed to be a suboptimal decision. Whereas if you make a quicker decision, you at least have a chance, however small or big it is, you have a chance to make a very optimal decision. So,
yeah, was the quote that you were trying to think of General George Patton? A good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan executed next week.
It might be, but I think there's another one that is something along the lines of like, no matter, like your plan will always fail at the first contact with enemy. Something along those lines. I never remember how the quotes actually work. I just remember the idea.
Yeah, awesome. One of my favorite quotes is from that boxer, Mike Tyson. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yeah, that's I think a variation of the same. I've used that a few times too. Yeah. And if we're using quotes, I think my favorite ever is that your like speed doesn't matter if you're going in the wrong direction. I'm misquoting it a little. I think it was Gandhi who said it, but anyway, it works very well in a lot of marketing and business decisions overall, that people are so stuck in this idea of like, well, we have this plan that we formed a year ago because usually we hired some big consultancy to tell us what to do. It's not working out, but damn it, we're stuck to it now.
Yeah, that's the concept of sunk costs, right? So you get, I don't know, attached, I guess, to some investment, even though it was a bad investment, because that just makes me feel bad to think I wasted all that money. All right, so if we could kind of summarize some of the key actions to take on marketing essentialism and being more willing to make big decisions in a more efficient manner, what would be some next actions for our listener to take?
Well, I think if you're thinking of messaging or positioning and such, I think the one thing to look at is just be way more critical of how significantly are you actually standing out with what you're saying. I mean, I see like companies fairly often hire me so that or when people even reach out to me first time, I check out their website. It is not just occasional, it is quite common that I see a website where I honestly couldn't tell if they sell software or bathtubs or airplanes based on what they're saying. I only get the idea because of a picture. So the wording they use is truly completely meaningless. Like they're saying things like industry leading development cycles or whatever. It's these completely meaningless words. Uh, but even and that is like far more common than you would ever expect. Very well reputable companies that clearly only rely on a massive sales force that and their own reputation. If you don't have a massive sales force and a huge, like really good reputation, you just wouldn't survive doing that.
Here's an example. I was just curious to see what the big headline was on Cisco's homepage. And you ready for this?
Go on.
See your IT from a better place.
So Cisco,
Wow.
if you're listening, give me a ring. Um, you need it. No, but that's like one thing. Like just being much more critical of say fewer things, or like force yourself to write a single headline with the idea that okay, if I can't say anything more than this, what do I need to say for people to have some like idea of what I do and why they should hire me or buy from me or us rather than anyone else. That's like just be way more critical of it. If you want to dig deeper into it, then rewind and like go through the steps we talked about. There's a lot to be learned by just doing those more carefully than people usually do them. On the decision making side, I would like. I'm sure there's some clever quotes about this, but like I would argue that there are these words that don't really have a plural, like data or software, and priority shouldn't have a plural. Like you shouldn't. Priorities is a bit of a weird idea. You can't have a lot of priorities. They're no longer priorities if you have 78 of them.
Yeah. You know, I actually, I think it was in the book, The One Thing by Gary Keller, that I learned that the word priority was originated without a plural. Yeah. It was only priority. And this idea of having multiple priorities goes against the original definition of priority, and it's a pretty recent quote unquote innovation. Right? If everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority.
And even if you just have too many priorities, you're not really going to make efficient progress on any of them. So overall, like just getting much more selective of like what are the essential things, because there are very few things ultimately that are essential. Once you're clear on what are the things you absolutely must do, so the essential things, you must solve these things, do them, fix them, whatever, then everything, it's easy to focus on them. It's much easier to get them done and then move on to the not essential things once you get through all the essential things. And the other thing, I mean, we happen to now talk about the speed of decision making and such. I mean, there's a dozen other similarly significant things about how to make decisions and like what makes you a better leader, basically. But it's a big one. Like just give yourself permission to make a quick decision with the idea that once it's quickly implemented, you see how it works. You don't consider it done. You consider it the first step. Like give yourself permission to be wrong without necessarily ever saying that you're wrong. Like you can present it to yourself and to everyone else as we're trying this quickly out to see if this is a good direction. If it isn't, then we won't go there. We'll test it just quickly with this little limited thing. So even if it goes horribly wrong, it's a negligible issue. So when I say like if solve a problem, I don't mean change everything about your business in a week to like solve something. No, like try it out. And like you'll be an infinitely more efficient business leader, marketing leader, by doing, like, making decisions with that in mind. That there are some things that are hard to test, but still test even those.
I'm guessing that you're a fan of the book Essentialism by Greg McCown. McCown or McCown?
I have it. I haven't actually read it, but I mean, I know the guy.
All right.
I did read half of it. Yeah, I think I've read like half of it, and it I don't know. I have a problem of finishing books.
Me too. Like 1 out of 50 books will I actually finish.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. I actually found out that, just total aside, but I have something called Erland's syndrome, and a lot of people have it. It was discovered by Dr. Helen Erland, and she was a guest on my other podcast, on my personal development show called Get Yourself Optimized. And basically what happens is your eyes get tired, and you just get fatigued as you read. And so she has these color filters that she figures out, or her practitioners figure out which colors to add as filters onto your glasses so that you don't get tired while you're reading.
All right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So you can get an assessment to see if you have Erland syndrome, and then you can get the special glasses. Yeah.
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah. But a lot of people get tired as they read, and that's not normal. I mean, it might be normal as far as a lot of people having Erland syndrome, but it's not as things are, optimally designed by nature. It's just a disorder or whatever you want to call it. Yeah. So if our listener wanted to get more training, or just learn more from you on either of these two topics, either messaging or decision making, and that marketing essentialism, do you have a course? Do you have, I know you you don't have a book yet, but do you have something that they could kind of dive into, maybe a longer video training that you've posted to your YouTube channel? Is there a place they can go for kind of a next step if they're not quite ready to hire you?
Yeah, so I have a video just on my homepage. It's changing pretty soon, but the topic remains mostly the same. So I'm not sure when it's going to change. I'm not sure when you're posting this. It's fairly soon, but it's basically about the common mistakes people make with messaging and how to correct them. Or the newer version focuses more on, like, how do you evaluate your messaging and how do you improve it from there? Like, how do you recognize the specific things to improve? And also, both versions talk a little about the, like, decision making, especially the new version, which is probably out by the time this comes out.
Yeah, and we can post or include it in the show notes for this episode as well.
Yeah, but I'll have it on my homepage, so should be pretty easy to find.
Yeah, and that's petersandeen.com.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. And so if our listener could glean one more kind of wisdom nugget from you that they haven't already heard, and it could be anything, it doesn't have to be marketing related even, what would it be?
I didn't know that you would ask that, so I didn't prep for this. I think, like, we touched on it, but I think a very big part of what slows people down is this idea of avoiding mistakes, avoiding looking silly, avoiding needing to admit you're wrong, and such. Whether it is about business, whether it's marketing, sales, personal things, politics, religion, whatever, like, people hold on to their ideas so strongly that it makes it harder for them to improve their opinions. So how I try to approach, like, to sort of negate some of this tendency in myself, is that I try not to form opinions, but rather I refer to, this is what I now know. This is the information I have. And based on that, this is a natural conclusion. If I get new info, that just immediately changes the natural conclusion. I don't even need to worry about, well, I was wrong. No, I just didn't have the info. Because I'm sure I'm just as hard-headed as everyone else, if not more. So I try not to form strong opinions about things. Same in marketing. I try not to feel like, well, I now know the best way to do something. Like, no, I don't. I know what makes sense given the information I have about this specific situation, and that's what I'm going to do, or that's what I'm going to recommend. And I can very clearly articulate why. because it's not based on opinion. It's based on, this is what we know. This is a natural conclusion of what we know. If you have more info, then tell me, and I'll filter it down to what I think it means. And I think that sort of approach of like, rather than seeing it as like prescriptive of, well, this person had this opinion, so it must be right. Like, well, did they actually understand your unique situation? Probably not. When they wrote the book where they said that, they weren't thinking of you specifically. So looking at admitting that, yes, you will be wrong. You'll make decisions that are suboptimal, but you'll anyway make those. No matter how hard you're trying to avoid those, you will make them. The better you, or the faster you recognize them, and the more you prepare for changing and optimizing based on them, the more consistently you make better decisions. Like, I don't play poker or any other gambling, but poker is a brilliant example of decision making. The best players are not those who have big egos. I mean, some of the best players have big egos, but that's certainly not because that's not the reason for them being good at poker. You cannot win every hand. You don't go in with the idea that I'm going to play every hand. It's the idea that you'll make the best decision for the long term. So often it is to just admit that, well, I put this much amount of money there. I should no longer put more. I'll fold. It's a better decision to lose what I just did or what I placed in there. So the sunk cost fallacy. But there's many other similar ones.
Yeah. So essentially, you're by forming strong opinions, you run a risk of tying up your relating your own self-worth to the accuracy of those strong opinions. And if you care about your ego, and you know, I love this way of stating it. When this is from Ephraim Olszewski, who was a previous guest on the show, and he talks about looking good and not looking bad, and that's a very powerful motivator for a lot of people. You know, and so I don't want to have that as a motivator for me, to look good and not look bad. I just want to reveal light in everything I do.
Yeah, and like that ties in back to what we talked about, how like the more time and resources you put into a specific project or strategy or whatever, the harder it is for most people to admit that they need to change something about it. So if you spend 2 weeks planning something and another 2 weeks implementing it, it's probably not like you're very married to it on any emotional level. But if you spend 12 months on it and a massive amount of company money, then like it takes much more guts to be like, well, crap, that didn't work. So like that's another reason why I encourage making quicker decisions. Like, yes, carefully consider and so on, but like make them much faster than most bigger companies especially make decisions.
Yeah. Awesome. And again, your website is petersandeen.com, Sandeen. And you are available to consult with our listener.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, listener, I hope you take this opportunity to at least evaluate what you're up to from a marketing decision-making perspective and from a messaging perspective, and consider hiring Peter. And we'll catch you on the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.